For most people, a talk about computer models can be pretty dry. So today I'd like to tell you a story about how we applied computer simulation methods to real-world patient care problems. Now, our story takes place in a cardiovascular intensive care unit. The medical director, Rex, he has a problem. Now, he runs a 24-bed ICU in a tertiary care center that cares for a wide variety of patients, including routine heart surgery, valve replacements, transplants, and ECMO. If patients don't leave the intensive care unit when they're ready, then this backlog causes surgeries to be canceled. His problem is that the cancellation rate is way too high. Patients are waiting too long to open heart surgery, which is making the hospital executives very unhappy. Now, compounding his problems is a rival city in the same province with a cardiovascular intensive care unit that has half the beds and a much lower cancellation rate. So Rex's first offense is to simply claim that his ICU patients are sicker. The problem is the executives aren't buying this because they know the severity scores in both cities are the same, and they want this problem fixed now. So Rex sits down and starts poring over the data. He notices that the avoidable day count in his ICU is much higher than his rival, and he thinks maybe he could work on that. So now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, an avoidable day is a metric that counts the number of days that a patient is in a bed that's inappropriate for their acuity. This is used as a measure of system capacity, where a high avoidable day count means that there are barriers to patient flow. There have been a great number of quality improvement studies that try to reduce avoidable days, and they've only really ever shown minimal impact. But this is largely assumed to be just due to a problem with making change stick and just simply being a change management problem. But really, this leads Rex to start to wonder whether there is truly a relationship between avoidable days and bed capacity. So before investing the time and effort into reducing the avoidable days, he needs to know the answer to that question. So Rex creates a computer model of his ICU. Just like in his ICU, there are patients that need to be admitted, they stay for a length of time, and then they are transferred. Now, to make sure that the model reflects the real world, there are a few variables that need to be accounted. First off, the number of admissions each day varies by the day of the week. So Rex needs to generate a number of admissions each day distribution curve. As you can see, there are considerable variations in the number of admissions each day, even on weekdays and certainly on the weekends. Second, simulated patients also must have a length of stay that matches the real world. There is a naturally distribution of lengths of stay for a population of patients in this ICU, and Rex just can't use a fixed number or a random number. So to account for this, Rex draws data from the province-wide critical care information system to generate a histogram for the length of stay profile for all of the patients admitted to his ICU. Then 1 billion simulated patients with a preset length of stay are run through the simulated ICU. Each simulated patient can exist in one of 5 different states. They can be awaiting admission, rejected if there were no available beds, admitted but ready for transfer once they've completed their length of stay, and then finally transferred. Now let's jump into the model and see how it works. The computer starts each simulated day by going through the simulated ICU and checking each admitted patient and their length of stay count. If the count is 0, then that patient is now ready for transfer. So as you can see, we have 2 empty beds and 3 patients that are ready for transfer. The computer now needs to select the number of admissions for today, and it uses the number of admissions distribution for that specific day of the week and a random number generator. Next, we need to know how long each of these patients are going to stay. So the model randomly determines the length of stay from the length of stay distribution curve. And so now our lucky 7 patients are ready for admission. The mathematically inclined in the group are likely to spot that we're going to have a problem. Starting the admission process is easy. There are 2 empty beds, so we can immediately admit 2 patients. Now there are no more empty beds, so some patients are going to need to be transferred, and it's time for us to deal with the transfer side of the model. There are 3 circumstances where a patient can leave an ICU. They can die, they can be transferred because another patient needs that bed, or they can be transferred because a ward bed has unexpectedly become available. To account for patients dying, we can't simply apply a total mortality rate for the ICU to each patient. While you may assume that patients that stay only one day are not very sick, in fact, they have a disproportionately higher death rate because they are frequently so sick when they first arrive. In contrast, patients that have been in the ICU for 10 days are very likely to be transferred out alive. So Rex calculated the mortality rate for each length of stay, and when a simulated patient comes to the end of their length of stay, their chances of dying reflects how long they were in the intensive care unit. The second transfer circumstance is when there is a patient waiting for that bed. As you can imagine, there is immense pressure to avoid canceling surgery, and a great deal of energy is spent getting any patient that is ready out. However, there is always a chance that there will be no beds available and nobody can be transferred out. In order to account for this in the model, Rex created a variable he called p-weighting. This probability is controlled by Rex and can vary to model a variety of different scenarios as he sees fit. So let's see how that works. Rex has a p-weighting set to 0.66, and the model checks each patient that is ready for transfer and uses a random number generator and the probability to decide who is being transferred. You can see that 2 more patients have been transferred. These 2 empty beds can now be filled with 2 more patients that are waiting for admission. But at this point, there are no more beds available, and the remaining waiting patients are going to be sent to the rejection bin. The final transfer circumstance occurs when a bed unexpectedly becomes available. This can occur for a variety of reasons, and it is independent of the surgical demand, so this is a variable that also needs to be accounted for. Rex created another transfer probability that he called the p-naught weighting. This variable is much like p-weighting insofar as that the probability is controlled by Rex and can vary to model different scenarios. So let's see how this one works. Now let's suppose that Rex has set the p-naught weighting to 0.25. The model tests every patient that is ready for transfer, and it appears today is not that patient's lucky day. They're going to remain in the ICU for one more day. And as the simulated day ends, the model goes through all of the ICU beds and finds any patients left who are still ready for transfer and adds them to the avoidable day count. After 1 billion patients have been run through the model, the total number of avoidable days are counted and the cancellation rate is calculated. Rex ran the simulator through every combination of p-weighting and p-naught weighting, and he found that the model behaved exactly as he expected. When the probability of patients being transferred, whether another patient was waiting or not, decreased, both the avoidable day count and the cancellation rate increased. When both p-weighting and p-naught weighting were set to 1, something really interesting was seen. Now, this would be the real-world equivalent of having every patient who is ready for transfer being immediately transferred out, no waiting. Absolutely everybody leaves right away. And you would expect 0 avoidable days, which he found. He also expected a very low cancellation rate, but it was 7.8%, which was less than 1% away from the actual cancellation rate. And if you think about it, you can see how that happened. Now recall from the computer model that you just saw, there is only 1 patient ready for transfer tomorrow, and it's pretty unlikely there's only going to be 1 patient waiting to be admitted tomorrow morning. And what happened when we decreased p-naught weighting and held p-weighting constant at 1.0? The real-world equivalent would be efforts to make more or less downstream beds available and to make transferring ICU patients out a real priority. Now, as expected, the avoidable day count went up as the p-naught weighting decreased due to more patients hanging around longer and longer. You'd also expect that the cancellation rate would go up as well. But in fact, in this case, it was an exactly flat line. There is no relationship between avoidable days and the cancellation rate. So now Rex has ammunition for his executives. Any efforts to reduce avoidable days is essentially a waste of time because it'll have no impact on their capacity problems. If they truly want to decrease the cancellation rate, then the number of beds in the ICU has to increase because the cancellation rate is too high even when there are no avoidable days. This is probably also why other people's efforts to increase capacity by reducing avoidable days hasn't worked. But more importantly, it also demonstrates the importance of applying computer simulation methods to real-world patient care problems because it can reveal surprising results that break down old dogma.